Good morning. I'll call to order the regularly scheduled meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee. Today is January 7th, 2016. I'm Lisa Bender. I chair the committee, and I'm joined by Council Members Reich, Goodman, Andrew Johnson. We are a quorum of the committee, and we also have Councilmember Fry here as well. We have 7 items on the published agenda. We have an 8th item to add in order to stay in keeping with our 60-day law. So I'll go through the agenda and then I'll move to add item number 8. Item number 1 is a public hearing for a fence height variance. Item number 2 is a variance and site plan review for Wells Fargo building. And item number 3 is a certificate of appropriateness appeal from Schaefer Richardson at 112 East Hennepin Avenue. We'll return to those after the consent items. Item number 4 is a zoning board of adjustment reappointment, setting the public hearing for 3 returning members of our zoning board of adjustment, whose service we are very thankful for. Item number 5 is rezoning for Alexander Roberts at 528 University Avenue Southeast, to rezone the property from R5 to C1 to establish a hotel. I'm sorry. We have the items 6 and 7 are under discussion, so we'll return to those. Those are landmark designations for 404 and 410 West Broadway. Those will come at the end. So I'll then amend the agenda. Move to amend the agenda to add item number 8, which is a rezoning at 2929 University Avenue Southeast. This is in Prospect Park. And I think everyone has that information. So I'll move to amend the agenda. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And then I'll move items 4, 5, and 8 for consent. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that carries. All right, so now we'll return to the public hearing, starting with item number 1 and a staff report on that.
Morning, Chair, committee members. This application is an appeal of a decision made by the Board of Adjustment. The Board of Adjustment granted a variance to develop on a steep slope in the Shoreland Overlay District for a fence. And as part of that same application, the applicant also sought to increase the fence height in the front yard from 3 feet to 6 feet. The applicant has appealed that decision that the board denied their fence height increase. The zoning map shows the subject parcel, 2012 Cedar Lake Parkway, just west of Cedar Lake. And there is a steep slope that drops down to the lake and parkway, as demonstrated on this photo. The applicant has proposed a fence that runs along the south side of the property in the established front yard, approximately 25, or the fence itself is approximately 25 feet long. 20 feet of that is in the established front yard setback. With granting a variance, 6 findings are required. 3 is a part of the standard variance, and 3 being that it's in the Shoreland Overlay District. The first finding is that the parcel is unique in that there is no direct access from Cedar Lake Parkway to the site, but that does not limit doesn't really pertain to the fence height increase as requested. So there's no true practical difficulty in adhering to the 3-foot ordinance. Secondly, the proposed fence height increase is not a reasonable use of the land. The fence in the front yard setback limited to 3 feet if solid, which this fence is, or 4 feet if open or decorative, is to maintain an open front yard setback and to maintain a uniform built environment. This fence, staff argues, does not. This fence encroaching into the front yard at 6 feet in height does disrupt that built environment, and also does limit visibility into and out of the site.
Excuse me, we have a question from Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you. So isn't the point of that to create uniformity in a place where you can see it? So, for example, you have a normal street that has a yard that goes 20 feet back, and so you wouldn't want a 6-foot fence where people could be walking by and they could be seeing it. Isn't that the purpose of that finding?
Yes,
And
general
you, and you would
visibility.
agree here that you can't walk by because it's like 30 feet in the air and they're way up on a steep slope and no one would see this fence. I'm unclear as to why you couldn't make the finding that this would not be, that this wouldn't be a problem on that point alone because you don't see it. The purpose of that is to make sure that we don't have people building 6-foot fences kind of at the street level. This is, what you're showing is way up high.
Correct.
No one sees that except for the immediate next door neighbor.
Sure. The proposed variance will alter the essential character of the area. There is a fairly uniform built environment demonstrating the houses, and this fence, 20 feet of that in the front yard, does disrupt that uniform built environment. While the zoning code doesn't necessarily protect views from private properties, the view of the lake as well as the skyline are disrupted by this fence. Then with the shoreland overlay, the first finding is regarding soil erosion. The fence is constructed during a site visit in November. There was no erosion present, either on site or down at the parkway. Secondly, limiting the visibility of structures from the protected water. This photo is taken from the parkway, obviously Cedar Lake being the protected water. We can see the 6-foot fence is very visible from the parkway. A 3-foot fence, as granted by the board, would a 3-foot fence be limiting the visibility? Yes. Is the 6-foot limiting the visibility? No. And finally, there are no watercraft associated with this variance. So with that, staff recommends the Zoning and Planning Committee, adapt staff's findings and deny the appeal to increase the fence height from 3 feet to 6 feet.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions for staff? And then we'll open the public hearing. Okay, there are none. We'll open the public hearing, and anyone who would like to speak, please come on up, state your name and address for the record. We'd also, if you haven't, please do sign in with the clerk before or after you speak, just so we have your written information.
Good morning. My name is Melissa Pollack. Chairman Bender, members of the committee, thank you very much for hearing our appeal. Respectfully, I'd like to disagree. I think we face a substantial practical difficulty in complying with the ordinance as written. We understand that the ordinance refers to the lake side of our yard as our front yard, but in all practical respects, it's the backyard. The UPS guy can't drive up to our front yard. We receive guests, from the quote unquote backyard. In all ways, our yards facing the alley serve front yard functions, and our yards facing the lake serve backyard functions. Unfortunately, I don't have color pictures, but let's see, which way does this go? Like this. So that is our back. This is what is officially our front yard, but functionally our backyard. Here's a picture of our official backyard and functional front yard. So the fence ordinance really does recognize that privacy is an appropriate backyard amenity, and allowing a 6-foot tall privacy fence seems appropriate in our situation. Frankly, the size and of the home built next door after the tear down on that property exacerbates the need for privacy in our backyard. The new construction sits at the minimum distance from the property line. It reaches the maximum height. And, also, frankly, zoning variances that were granted for that tear down have exacerbated this problem. Zoning variances reduced the established front yard setback for that property and increased the maximum floor area ratio for that property. So our situation as a whole, which includes the quirk of the property layout and the scale of the new construction really presents us a practical difficulty in complying with the ordinance as written. The other points I'd like to make is that I would disagree that the fence has a detrimental effect on the essential character of the neighborhood or on the built environment. And, I think actually this photo makes that point. The other point or bit of evidence I would raise about that is the extraordinary support that we have received from the neighbors in favor of the fence and that it's attractive and appropriate. I don't know if you received in your packets copies of the petition that people signed. There have been subsequent emails from a number of other neighbors, and we have neighbors here today to speak in support of the fence. Finally, one final point on the issue of the fence disrupting the view from the next door neighbor property. This is a picture. Andrew had a picture taken in the winter. This is a picture taken from their property, and I would make the point that their view of the city skyline and the lake is framed by the trees here, not by our fence. So it doesn't really mess with their view. All in all, the peculiar situation of our lot presents us a practical difficulty in complying with the fence ordinance, and we ask that you grant a variance, essentially applying backyard rules, which would allow a 6-foot-tall privacy fence in our case. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. The next person may come on up and please state your name and address for the record.
Council, thank you. My name is Timothy Kane. I'm a neighbor of Melissa Pollack's and David Pollack's. We have lived there since 1987. We are here in support of her request for this fence. We feel that it is in keeping with the neighborhood and in keeping with the built environment. We do not see it as a detriment to the neighborhood at all. The whole aspect and nature of our specific block, so to speak, is unique in the city of Minneapolis. As Melissa indicated, the lakeside access to our property is fundamentally our backyard. It's where we have our deck, where we do our barbecuing, where we sit and eat in the summertime and enjoy nature, which is the lake. All deliveries, all access is through the opposite side of the house. So the whole thing is flip-flopped, where in a normal environment, in a normal city block, you have a very clear front and backyard. That is not the case in our block area. So I'd like to reiterate that and reiterate our support for Melissa's request. And thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Come on up.
Hello, I'm David Pollack, Melissa's husband. I thought she covered most of the points. But, you know, the issue about the fence not fitting into the neighborhood character, I mean, ideally there would be no fence. There wouldn't be a need for the fence. You know, we didn't need one when before the previous house was torn down. And it was just more modest and wasn't encroaching on us. And so that need for privacy didn't have to be staked out maybe like this. But, you know, so comparatively, though, I think the fence fits into the neighborhood character. You notice that the new construction, like the highest point of it is toward the lake where it's visible from down below. You know, so if exceptions are being granted for that construction, it seems only fair that we get comparative allowances for our much more modest structure. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Anyone else? Last call. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Just a reminder to please sign in with your name and address with the clerk. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to move to grant the appeal and direct staff to draft findings with regard to the issue specifically of practical difficulties. This is not a tough call. I don't know the Pollacks. I've never met them. I've never talked to them. They've tried to talk to me, actually, but I wouldn't talk to them. And so this is the first time I'm seeing this, and it just seems very, very obvious. This is an area clearly where the front yard is the backyard. And I don't know, did we not go out and look at this? Are we unfamiliar as a staff with the conditions out there? I mean, this is like 2 stories above the grade. And so it's very clear, since all of the house's entrances face the alley, that is really the front yard. So this seems like a very strict adherence over something minor like a fence, and it seems somewhat unfair that they would have to pay a fee, take the time, go through the Board of Adjustment, and come down here today over a fence. So I'm a little bit distressed that it got to this point, to be honest with you. So I would just ask staff to draft findings and take that into consideration if we see further situations that look like this.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. I agree. Thank you so much for going through the process, and see if there's any further discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that carries. That moves us to item number 2, which is variance and site plan review appeal related to parking on the Wells Fargo site on Lake Street.
Good morning, Chair Bender and committee members. The application before us at this point is an appeal of the decision of the Planning Commission related to 2 applications for the Wells Fargo Bank at 1505 West Lake Street. The Planning Commission on November 16th denied a variance to the maximum parking requirement for this project, as well as attaching a condition of approval to their site plan that required them to meet the maximum parking requirement. So those are the 2 items that are subject of today's appeal. The project site is located on Lake Street. It's a uniquely shaped parcel as outlined in the dark black here, with frontage both on Irving and Humboldt. The site currently has 49 parking stalls. The applicant is proposing to redevelop the site, put the bank building at the corner, and as part of that, the parking lot would be redeveloped as well and have 36 parking stalls. The maximum parking allowance for this use is 17 stalls, so while it's a reduction over the 49 stalls currently, it's more than double their maximum parking requirement. Staff finds that there are no practical difficulties that exist in complying with the ordinance, in this case with the maximum parking requirement, and there are no unique circumstances to justify that request. The statement submitted by the applicant essentially asserts that the need for the parking variance is due to the high number of employees that drive to the site. A travel demand management plan was prepared for this project, and as part of that, it noted that of the 27 employees who currently work on site, 100% of them drive. The travel demand management plan had a mode share goal of getting 90% of the employees to drive, with 5% biking and 5% taking transit to the site. The mode share goal for customers was for 70% of customers to drive, with the balance made up of walking, biking, and taking transit to the site. Those mode share goals are really low, particularly given the pedestrian-oriented nature of this area. This site is in a pedestrian-oriented overlay district. The site is uniquely situated close to bus transit with access to lines in either direction with service every 15 minutes. It is 2 blocks south of the Midtown Greenway bike trail, 3 blocks east of the Grand Rounds, and about 3 blocks away from the Uptown Transit Center, which provides access via transit to the rest of the city and the parts of the greater metro. The area is walkable and densely populated. Given the access to bike and transit facilities, it's likely that a much higher number of employees and customers can and will use alternate modes of transportation instead of driving to the site. The mode split approved on previous TDMPs this year was closer to 55% for single occupancy vehicles, and here we're looking at 90 for employees and 70 for customers. Again, the variance is more than double the maximum requirement and would not be reasonable or in keeping with the spirit and intent of the ordinance or the comprehensive plan. When the Uptown Small Area Plan was adopted in 2008, one of the main goals of that plan was to make this area more walkable, more bikeable, and to improve streets for those types of activities. There are several supporting policies in the plan that talk about walking and biking being the preferred mode of travel for local needs. The plan also specifically encourages employers to increase transit use for employees by participating in the MetroPass program. Staff had recommended a denial of the applications based on those findings and had recommended conditions of approval that the applicant participate in the MetroPass program and make bike parking more visible in lieu of providing the number of parking stalls that are proposed. I'd like to call your attention to a couple of things in your packets. So after this went to Planning Commission, the applicant did put together a revised site plan that shows 25 parking stalls. So it's a reduction over what went to the Planning Commission, which was 36, but still exceeds their maximum parking requirement. So again, their maximum is 17. So this is 25. The parking stalls that were removed from the south part of the parking lot here where it's adjacent to residential zoning and from this driveway that comes in from Irving. If this weren't in the pedestrian-oriented overlay district, they would be allowed 28 parking stalls. So even if this weren't in the PO, this would still exceed. It would be within what they're allowed. So it's just something for comparison's sake here that they have proposed this other option. But again, the same findings would need to be made, and staff hasn't found any practical difficulty or unique circumstances here. Also, the neighborhood contacted me yesterday. They were going to submit another letter, but there should be one in your packets. I told them I would call that out because it might be buried deep somewhere in the staff report. But we did get a letter of recommendation from the neighborhood to actually approve the variance. And there's a letter from one neighbor in there as well. So I'll close with that and stand for any questions.
Any questions? There are none, so we can go ahead with the public hearing. I will open the public hearing, invite the applicants to begin, and we can take further testimony from there.
Hi, good morning. Brian Reno with Stantec Architecture for Wells Fargo Bank. I think really our practical difficulty and the reason that we've come all the way to an appeal is that our true practical difficulty is this is not a theoretical use or a new use to the site. The big picture here is Wells Fargo has 2 locations across Humboldt Avenue from each other. And they're consolidating and right-sizing the facility to meet today's needs in the marketplace. So their lease at the adjacent Sons of Norway building is coming to an end. They own this property that currently just has a very large drive-up on it. And to right-size to today's needs, they are reducing the drive-up from 7 lanes to 2 lanes. But they know today that they have 22 employees that will remain on the site. They know today they have an average of 20 to 25 customers that utilize parking at peak times. They know that today. That's what exists, and that's the reason our TDM plan proposed those averages. These are things that we know and can see today. Wells Fargo does support the MetroPass program, and they would certainly they certainly encourage a whole range of green policies, from green building and getting their employees to use transit, but we can't change the reality of the fact that many people that use the bank today still drive there, and that a large percentage of the employees, based upon where they can afford to live and where they live today, commute to the site via automobile. Also, we know that from a safety perspective, we like to have a certain amount of parking near our entry door, so we have accommodated that at our rear entry. We have made many changes to the site plan to comply with every other aspect of the pedestrian overlay district. We've positioned the building on the corner of the site. We've created a very pedestrian-oriented entrance at the corner of the site. We've actually also put a walk-up ATM at the corner of the site. So, and our site will probably be the most heavily landscaped commercial site anywhere in this district, if not in all of Minneapolis. We have a very high landscaping ratio. We've already removed the majority of our parking spaces. But our primary concern is, again, we know what our employee count is. We know what our customer usage is, and we do not want to cause a problem to the neighborhood or to cause traffic congestion because our customers and employees are forced to park on surrounding streets. So it's really, our practical difficulty really comes down to the actual conditions on the ground today. The site was originally developed in 1970 as a completely drive-up oriented site. We're really changing it to primarily pedestrian oriented, but we do have a legitimate need for parking to accommodate our bank customers and our employees today. And with that, I would love to take any questions that you have.
Are there any questions for the applicant? Okay, there are none. Would anyone else like to speak? Come on up and please state your name and address for the record. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Sally Head. I live across the street from Wells Fargo. I'm at 3029 Humboldt. And my request for you today is to give them any and all parking spaces that they ask for. Parking in Uptown and on Humboldt is a problem. There are not enough spots, and my guests frequently tell me that they hate coming to my house because there's not enough places to park. Eliminated needed parking spaces hurts the residents and the surrounding businesses. The suggestion that adding a bike rack will mitigate the problem is ludicrous. And I'm not anti-biking, and I'm not anti-busing. In fact, I work in Bloomington, and I got a certificate from the city for my efforts to bike to work. In fact, my family owns a multi-million-dollar company making bicycle wheels. So I'm not anti-biking, and I'm not anti-bus. However, the workers in Uptown, whom I talk to, don't really ride the bus. So because we're in a busy bus area, and although we have this great access to public transportation and the bike trail, which is the reason I live there, the assertion that people will just ride the bus is simply not true. Adrian from Great Clips, as well as Marcia and Georgianne from Lunds, all live in Linden Hills, and all of them drive to work. And they park on Humboldt. They could have a beautiful ride around the lakes to work every day, but they don't. Several other workers I talk to at the shops, such as Blush and Mac and all the other things at Calhoun Square, a lot of those people live in Ridgefield, Bloomington, St. Louis Park. Again, those are very easy bus rides on the bike trail, yet they drive. And they park on Humboldt. Why? Because it's the closest street to Calhoun Square without meters. In the summer, with the recreational traffic, it's even worse. Adrian has to park 3 to 4 blocks down on Humboldt because it's full. If these workers are not riding the bus, it's unrealistic to expect that Wells Fargo employees will take the bus, and even more unrealistic to assume that Bob Johnson from Brooklyn Park, who's coming down to get his mortgage, is going to take the bus. And he's certainly not going to ride his bike with an armful of papers to sign his mortgage. I applaud the efforts to encourage biking and public transportation. But if you can't get people like Adrienne, Georgianne, and Marcia to ride the bus, the programs are ineffective. And eliminating existing parking spaces will only cause hardships to the residents, our guests, and to all the surrounding businesses in the area, not just Wells Fargo. Traffic and parking is a hot issue in East Calhoun, and the neighborhood supports more parking spaces for Wells Fargo. I applaud their efforts for more green space and think that Wells Fargo has adequately addressed that with their landscaping. I live across the street, and I have to look at it every day. I think it's fine. I really like the fact that they're going away from more of a drive-through aspect. Again, do not create additional parking problems in Uptown. Please give Wells Fargo all the parking spaces they request. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Anyone else?
I would just like to, in case you didn't see it in your packet, we have a letter from the East Calhoun Community Association in support of our parking variance for 36 spaces. And since I didn't say it before, I wanted to reiterate that we did provide bike parking on both sides of our building and bike lockers and so forth. And that we feel that we have complied with every other aspect of the pedestrian-oriented district, but we know that overlay and the parking requirements in it don't suit the present activity of Wells Fargo, its customers, and the community, and that's why we've come here today to appeal. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Goodman.
I'm just wondering, do you allow for these 36 spots to be used by others when you're not operating the bank? How is this helping the neighborhood get rid of parking?
We did discuss that.
No, come on up to the microphone. So I mean, I can maybe understand it would be helpful